first that we have, we are very honored to have not only a leader, but a teacher and a professor. She's an executive director of the First Nations Confederacy of Cultural Education Centers, and she's been inducted into the Common Law Honor Society. She's also on the Kitigan-Zibi Band Council. Most importantly, a mother and grandmother of 9. Claudette Commanda. So
thank you, Niigaan. Since you introduced me so well, you won't have to go. Kway nitchkiweduk, kway nishnabek. Kani mitchkijigong kinu, dedishnakas kitagon zibi donjiba. Bonjour toutes mes amis. Mon nom c'est Claudette Commanda. Je suis une femme algonquin de la Première Nation de Kitigan-Zibi. So greetings to all of you, brothers and sisters, friends. It's an honor to be here. My spirit name is Connie Michkijigun Kinu. That name was given to me through ceremony, through the elders, through prayers and offerings. But my English name is Claudette Commanda. And my government name is 073-00-79202. That's who I am in the eyes of the government. And anyone that complains about Canada moving forward with a national identity card, well, let me tell you, these identity cards have been around since 1868 to First Nations people through the Indian Act. And that's wrong. We are people, first and foremost. And I greet everyone with a handshake from my heart. And I welcome all of you to unsurrendered Algonquin land, the territory, the homeland of my ancestors since time immemorial. Welcome, my brothers and sisters. Regardless of what color you come from, what race you come from, what nation you come from, welcome to unsurrendered Algonquin territory. My ancestors lived here long before anyone ever came here and claimed this land as Canada. And we opened our arms wide with love for the last 520 years, and we're going to continue with our arms open wide and loving people. Thank you, Albert, for those beautiful words of prayer and the welcome that you gave when you spoke about the land and you gave history, the truth. Chimigwech for that. Thank you, Elder Raymond Robinson. Thank you for reflecting back on what's important, and that is ceremony. Being who we are is through our ceremonies. I want to acknowledge our Algonquin Chief Waituk and those other Algonquin members that are here. And I also want to acknowledge the Algonquin Kokomisa. Please stand. Chimigwech for your love and your hard work of what you're doing for our people. Sharing knowledge is a responsibility that the Creator has given us. And I humble myself before you and before the Creator and my ancestors that I present my words to you in a good way. I had the honor of sitting with Elder Elmer Corshane in Manitoba from Saugeen First Nation. And what he said to me, speak from the heart. And that really touched me, because my grandfather William always said, speak from the heart. And when you speak from the heart and you speak from the Spirit, you speak truth. And the truth must be told. And some people will not like the truth. But if we are to move forward in recreating, or rather creating, a new relationship between the settlers and First Nations, you have to get to the truth. You have to know where you're coming from in order to know where you're going to go. So my words here to you are from my heart and spirit. It's unfortunately that I have to put it on paper, because you see, in my menopausal moment I tend to forget. So I had to put down things on paper. My 3-year-old grandson today said, Kokum, because I told him I was going to go speak here, and he said, Kokum, go and be like Bruce Lee. And then my 4-year-old grandson said, no, be like a Ninja Turtle, cowabunga. All right. So I am sharing my knowledge, my traditional knowledge, my life experiences, my ancestral teachings, and those cultural practices as a First Nation woman blended with my academic training. And I would be remiss if I didn't acknowledge my elders, my family, my relatives, my community, my spiritual and cultural teachers, and my life experiences as an Anishinaabe. For they are the most foremost educational foundation that has assisted in my upbringing and as well as my mainstream education. Land, land, land. This is who we are. And without land, we are nothing. And it is my responsibility to speak about the importance of the land for First Nations people, for Indian people. We know our grandmothers are going throughout all the Algonquin communities to talk about the importance of our land, to talk about that unity. And our land is not for sale, and it is not for the taking, and it is not for treaty making at all whatsoever. Our children today and our children tomorrow and those that are 7 generations behind us, they need this land. Without this land, who are they? The Creator gave us one of the most important and precious gifts, and that was putting us here on Turtle Island. We come from the land. And we need to ensure that that land is there for our children, so they too can practice and exercise and know who they are and live their rights as a human being, as an Anishinaabe, to practice their ways, to learn their languages, to know their ceremonies. Everything is connected to the land. I was asked to speak about Section 35, but you see, how can we move forward in understanding Canadian law if you don't know history? Because you see, First Nations people, Anishinaabe, or whichever First Nation you come from, we had our own laws long before Canada was even thought of. We've had our laws since time immemorial, given to us inherently right from the Creator. What a powerful gift when it comes right from the Maker, right from the sovereign power, right from the Creator. Our inherent rights, first and foremost, is what we speak about. Inherent rights. In our traditional Anishinaabe laws, and yes, we had our laws, absolutely. Contrary to what some people may think we never did, we do, and we still have them. Ogichita Dabwejigewin, that is the Creator's law, the most highest of laws. All life and other laws, values, and ceremonies flow from this great law. And we need to ensure that this law is passed on to our children and it is connected to the land. The past few speakers here have spoken about the importance of land. And I think this symposium should have been about land. But that's okay. That we're bringing forward different ideas, because it's all about dialogue, it's all about teaching, it's all about learning. And we all have something to share with one another. We know that Canada was created by colonial history and colonial law, contrary to what Stephen Harper said when he said Canada does not have a colonial history. I think Harper suffers from the ostrich syndrome. His head's always in the sand. Well, he's got to get out of there, and he's got to face reality. Yes, indeed, Canada was built on colonial history. Colonial laws have become Canadian laws. And these are the laws that continue to intrude, to invade, and to impact First Nations people. And it has to stop. Even the terminologies Aboriginal and Native, those are not our terminologies. These are inventions of government. They come from colonial thought and colonial language. We know who we are in our own language. Anishinaabe, that's who I am. No matter what nation you come from, you have your way of identifying who you are. But for the purpose of explaining where I'm coming from, I'm going to use the terminology Indian. I'll always remember what my grandfather William said. He said, well, at least there are Indian people in this world, but you don't see a race of Aboriginals or a race of natives. And thank God Columbus didn't land in Turkey, because he would have all called us turkeys. But I know where there's a few turkeys and chickens. Center Walk, not far from here. And they begin with a big C. Anyhow, I'm going to use the term Indian or First Nation to explain where I'm coming from. And when I'm speaking about First Nations or Indian, I'm talking about me as a person, as a First Nation. I'm not speaking about the Inuit nor the Métis, because the Inuit and the Métis can clearly speak for themselves. The label Indian was given to us by Columbus because he was looking for India. And as you know, he got lost, and he didn't find India, but rather my people found him. Of course, they give him the title, the greatest navigator of the sea, because he's lost. Can you imagine if he really found what he was looking for, what they would have called him? Any of my students that are in this I was going to say classroom, but in this room, you remember my rap song when I made about good old Chris, right? Well, I ain't going to do it today, though. No, I forget it. But you know, it's amazing that there are some that do not know the truth that Columbus was lost. And therefore they are misguided by this myth or this great lie that Columbus discovered America. It's this great lie that continues to perpetuate colonialism, to intrude on our rights, to feed the legal system with power to negate First Nations people from our right to our land, their jurisdiction of our natural resources, the education of our children, and even the right to our children. In essence, this legal authority, the discovery, is the most violent and mass weapon of destruction used by colonial and Canadian governments and the courts against First Nations, yesteryear and today. And let's not forget, and I keep stressing this, and any of my students can vouch for this, that Canadian law is built on the foundation of colonial law. And let me remind you that all of Turtle Island, which is called North America, this is Anishinaabe. This is Indian land, it's First Nation land. Long before this land became Dominion land, settlers land, Canadian or American land, or treaty lands, or government lands, or whatever land you want to call it, it was, it is, it will always be Anishinaabe, period. And our land is very fundamental and the essence for First Nations people. And this must be respected, absolutely. I want to share with you the law of colonialism and its impacts on First Nations. And I'm sure many of you know this law of colonialism. But for those of you that don't, for those of you that do, I'm going to remind you. Europe and the Vatican applied their laws against First Nations through a papal bull, through the doctrine of terra nullius, through the doctrine of manifest destiny, through the doctrine of discovery. The doctrine of discovery is the basis of all laws, including Section 35 of Canada's 1982 Constitution and those other laws affecting First Nations. The papal bulls laid the foundation for the doctrine of discovery to subjugate, to seize Indian people and Indian lands. And this doctrine created such misery for Indigenous peoples of the American hemisphere. And this doctrine needs to be dispelled. How can we move forward in creating a new relationship? How can we move forward to use Canada's laws to advance First Nations rights if these laws are built on the premise and on the foundation of the doctrine of discovery? This doctrine, this legal authority, has to be disbanded. It has to be eliminated. It cannot be used anymore. We know that historically both the colonial and Canadian, and as a matter of fact even American governments, they use this doctrine in their lawmaking on Indian policy, on treaties, and in court decisions relating to Indian title or land rights. So for example, we have the Johnson versus McIntosh, the Cherokee Nation versus Georgia. This is US law. We have the St. Catharines Milling here in Ontario. We have the Frank Holler case at the Supreme Court of Canada level, and the numerous other Supreme Court of Canada decisions dealing with Aboriginal title. This doctrine has a tremendous adverse effect on our rights. And the doctrine of discovery created other specific laws for the purpose to take all possessions and property of Indian people. The Royal Proclamation of 1763, the British North American Act of 1867, the Indian Act, the Natural Resources Transfer Act of 1936, Section 35, 1982. These are to name but a few of these laws that were created on the premise of doctrine of discovery. And I cannot stress it enough that this legal authority has to be eliminated. It has to. And you know, all my students that are in the audience, you have heard my lectures on the doctrine of discovery and the steadfast position on this blatant racist authority. As a matter of fact, one of the last semester when I was teaching on Indian residential schools, we had the students had to give group presentations, and one of my students dressed up as the papal bull. Yes, let me tell you, it is bull all right, this doctrine of discovery. Yes, okay. Well, I want to share with you my joy in discovering what Judge Slate said about this doctrine. Most recent, at a conference, Justice Slade, here's what he stated. The current Aboriginal-Canadian relationship grew from the roots of Canada's constitutional tree, which in turn, as I've noted, is founded on what scholars term the legal fiction, called the doctrine of discovery. The doctrine of discovery, when defined as an exclusive principle of benevolent paternalism, or as it was in the McIntosh decision, as an assertion of federal ownership of fee simple title to all the Indian nations in the United States. He also goes on to say, we do know the foundation of Aboriginal law, or the relationship of Aboriginal people in the Canadian constitutional framework, has probably been founded upon a legal fiction. Yes. In other words, the roots of the Aboriginal law tree are rotten and are incapable of bearing anything that is sustainable. Our attempts to craft new and creative branches onto this tree, as we have witnessed since 1982, will not bring health to the tree's roots. I believe that nothing less than a new approach is required, which includes discarding the false discovery document and all that grew out of it, and especially that Canada's first inhabitants are wards of the states. Because you see, this doctrine of discovery did place us as wards of the state, and we're still under the wards of the, classified as wards of the state. When he speaks about Aboriginal law, it's not our laws that he's talking about. He's talking about the law and how Canadian law and how it impacts Aboriginal people. Because I don't believe there's such a thing as Aboriginal law. Absolutely not. We have our own laws, and we got to go back to those laws, and those laws are found in our ceremonies. They're found in our teachings. We had our own form of governance through our traditional ways, through our societies that were collective, cohesive. And everyone in the community had the right and had a fundamental role in decision making. It was important. Men and women had their roles and responsibilities. Today what we have is how Canada applies its laws to Aboriginal peoples. Canada has created 3 categories of placing us under Aboriginal people, the terminology Aboriginal. You have First Nations, you have Inuit, and you have Métis. We are different people, very different. Even under First Nations, 633 First Nations in Canada, we are diverse peoples. We have commonalities, absolutely, because we are the first peoples that were created here on Turtle Island. The first peoples. Long before anyone else came to these lands, we are the first peoples here. And we are going to continue to be the first peoples here. To go back to this doctrine, it must be eliminated by governments, by the courts, by educational institutions, by law schools, and by society and the world at large. And only until this heinous authority is destroyed, we First Nations will not be free from the shackles of colonialism, the legal and socio-economic oppressions and racism. It's sad that racism is still alive and well in this country, and Canada speaks about its big brotherhood image in the world. Canada needs to clean up its own backyard first and foremost before it goes out and helps anybody else. To dispel, to eliminate these colonial doctrines, we need to do this so we can celebrate a free and independent right to the jurisdiction of our homelands, our natural resources, to exercise the right to reclaim, to revitalize, to restore our inherent laws, our values, our histories, our languages, our cultures, and our sacred wampum belt treaties. And then we can have our rights honorably, legally, and constitutionally recognized and celebrate those legal victories from the courts in the same way that Canadians are granted legal protections. Where we can live side by side with Canada, respecting the fundamental histories, the rich culture and gifts of the original peoples of the land, and to uphold the spirit and intent of the treaties made between the First Nations and the settlers, which is essential in building and fostering nation-to-nation relationship based on mutual respect and understanding and coexistence as a people, so we can celebrate our differences. As my grandfather William said, he founded the Circle of All Nations, and that was primarily to bring people together in racial harmony. And we have to celebrate our differences. Doesn't mean to say everybody has to become a First Nation person, or you got to go back 10 generations, find a great-great-grandmother was Cherokee. No, absolutely not. It means being proud of who you are, whichever race you come from. Learn your own teachings that the Creator gave you, because the Creator gave everyone, including, yes, white people. You have your creation story, and you have your roles and responsibilities and teachings as well. My grandfather meant bringing people together, celebrating those differences, but importantly, respecting First Nations history, respecting our rights, respecting our laws. And that it is our way. It has to be done our way whenever we are going to create a new relationship between First Nations and the settlers. It has to be done on our terms. It has to be. And is Canada ready? Are you ready? Are you? Then you need to go out there. Right. Good. Right. Okay. I'm not getting in the middle of this, because let me tell you what you need to do. All right? Well, I say to you, make it your responsibility. Learn more about this doctrine of discovery. Learn more about colonial history. Learn more about First Nations history, traditional history. Learn more about the impacts of racism and colonialism against First Nations. And demand from your neighbor, your politicians, your lawmakers, your legal crusaders, stand together with us, and you too, as brothers and sisters amongst your own people. Stand together to end colonial dominance and oppression of First Nations by eliminating the doctrine of discovery as a legal authority. And then by standing with First Nations that we create a new dialogue and action, action, action. To create a new relationship, nation to nation to nation, because we are nations. We're not a file in some government office up on 10 Wellington Street. And we're not Canada's Indian problem. We are people. We are nations. And come to us on our terms and we will build a better country. Perhaps the 7 grandfathers will help you to make yourself ready for what needs to be done. And again, I say action is needed. To cherish knowledge is to know wisdom. To know love is to know peace. To honor all of the creation is to have respect. Bravery is to face the foe with integrity. Honesty in facing a situation is to be brave. Humility is to know yourself as a sacred part of creation. Truth is to know all things. So in closing, my brothers and sisters, the voices of our ancestors, the Anishinaabe, must remain through our elders. For they were the ones that were given that responsibility to ensure that our oral history would never be forgotten. The voices must remain intact through our elders, our children, for us today, and for those who are not yet here. So the circle continues, one beginning with no end. I have spoken. Thank you for listening. Merci à tous. Thank you. Chimi Gwech ni Wichkiwedo. Claudette Commanda.